We trust them with our life savings, our inheritances, our futures. For centuries, banks have been the ultimate symbols of security: uncheckable, unbreachable, and absolute. Today, we have laser grids, biometric scanners, and complex digital encryption. But imagine a time when all that stood between a thief and a multi-million-dollar fortune was a single iron door and a simple mechanical lock. Before the high-tech heists of Hollywood, there was a first. There was a moment when the world realized that the fortress was actually vulnerable. In 1831, a man walked into a bank in the middle of New York City. He didn't have a gun. He didn't have a getaway driver. He had a piece of metal he had filed down in a dark room. When he walked out, he hadn't just stolen a fortune, he had changed the history of finance forever. Today, on FirstoGraphy, we are uncovering the genesis of the great bank heist, from the silent lockpickers of Wall Street to the legendary outlaws of the Wild West. This is the story of how the first bank robberies changed the world. The date was March 19, 1831. The location, Citibank on Wall Street, New York. At this time, banking was a gentleman's game. There were no armed guards at the doors. There were no silent alarms. Security was based on the belief that the heavy iron doors were enough to deter any common criminal. But Edward Smith was not a common criminal. Smith was a craftsman, man who understood the mechanics of locks better than the people who built them. He wasn't interested in violence. He was interested in physics and patience. He spent months observing the Citibank. He studied the schedules of the clerks, the movements of the night watchman, and most importantly, he studied the locks. In the 1830s, locks were massive and mechanical. They were thought to be unpickable, but Smith knew that every lock has a secret. Through a combination of observation and trial and error, he created a duplicate skeleton key. On a quiet Sunday morning, while the city was at church and Wall Street was deserted, Edward Smith approached the bank. He didn't break a window. He didn't use an axe. He simply inserted his key, turned it, and walked through the front door. The first great bank heist in American history had begun. Inside the bank, it was deathly silent. Smith moved with the confidence of an owner. He made his way to the vault. In 1831, vaults weren't the massive steel rooms we see today. They were often just iron-bound wooden chests or stone chambers with iron doors. Smith went to work. Using his tools, he bypassed the internal locks. When the doors finally creaked open, he saw a sight that would make any modern thief's eyes water. A staggering $245,000 in banknotes and gold coins. This was an astronomical sum. For a single man to possess this much wealth in the 19th century was unheard of. Smith stuffed the loot into several large canvas bags. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He walked back out the front door, turned his key to lock it behind him, and vanished into the New York fog. When the bank clerks arrived on Monday morning, they found everything exactly as they had left it. The doors were locked, the windows were intact. But the vault was empty. The city was paralyzed with fear. If a bank could be emptied without a single sound, whose money was safe, the robbery sent shockwaves through the financial world. People rushed to banks to withdraw their savings, creating a mini panic. The authorities even suspected the bank's own directors, believing it had to be an inside job. But Edward Smith made a classic mistake. He had too much money and no way to spend it without drawing attention. He began living a life of luxury that didn't match his station. He moved into a lavish boarding house and started flashing rare, high-denomination banknotes. Jacob Hayes, a pioneer of detective work, began tracking the serial numbers of the stolen notes. He followed the trail of the money until it led him directly to Edward Smith's door. When the police raided Smith's room, they found nearly $185,000 of the stolen money hidden under his bed. Smith was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in Sing Sing prison. He was the first person ever convicted of a major bank heist. He proved that banks were vulnerable, and in doing so, He forced the industry to innovate. If Edward Smith's heist was a surgical strike, the next evolution was an act of war. For 35 years after Smith's arrest, bank robberies remained rare and mostly involved stealth. That all changed on February 13, 1866, in Liberty, Missouri. This was the first daylight, armed bank robbery in U.S. history. A group of 10 to 12 men, believed to be the James Younger gang including the legendary Jesse James, rode into town. They didn't have keys, they had revolvers. They stormed the Clay County Savings Association. They didn't care about silence. They screamed orders, held tellers at gunpoint, and demanded the safe be opened. They made off with $60,000, but they left a trail of blood. On their way out, they shot and killed a 17-year-old student, George Y. Moore, who was simply walking to school. This was the birth of the outlaw era. Bank robbery was no longer just a crime of skill. It was a violent defiance of the law. This event forced banks to invent the high security measures we see today, the creation of time-locked safes, the hiring of armed guards like the Pinkertons, and the installation of iron bars on teller windows. Today, the idea of walking into a bank with a skeleton key or a horse is a thing of the past. Modern robbery has moved to the digital world, where hackers try to steal millions with code instead of keys. But every piece of security we take for granted exists because of these pioneers of crime. History is a series of firsts: the first computer virus, the first pandemic, the first prison break, and the first bank robbery. These events don't just show us how people broke the law. They show us how society learned to protect itself. What do you think? Was Edward Smith a genius who got unlucky? Or was his downfall inevitable? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the genesis of the Great Bank Heist, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to FirstoGraphy. We bring you the untold stories of how our world was built, one first at a time. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next chapter.